Let me welcome Anab to an interview for the 270th anniversary edition, very special edition of our journal. Anab, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, and lots to talk about, huge amounts to talk about. Can we kick off? I was reading down your CV and even how you describe yourself. You know, I've got down here designer, futurist, filmmaker, educator, much more besides. How do you describe yourself at parties?
I generally try and not give a one-line description. I'm usually talking about what I do. So I help people imagine better futures, for instance. And that's a much nicer way of, because then that gets a conversation going, and I'm not put into a label, because the whole practice has been about defying labels.
And could you say a little bit about how you got here, a bit about your background and what were the various pathways you navigated and came to this point?
Sure. How far do you want me to go back?
Let's start at the very beginning.
At the very beginning. I suppose if I were to condense it, I'm born and brought up in Ahmedabad in India. Went to school and college at NID, National Institute of Design, and studied filmmaking, and then came to the Royal College of Art to do what was then called interaction design. Then became Design Interactions and worked at Nokia, Microsoft Research, and ended up starting Superflux with my partner, John Arden.
And tell me on that journey, when did the idea of Superflux, how did that come about? It's a pretty imaginative leap, I would say.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
It was a napkin sketch in a pub.
Was it?
It was
actually
literally
a napkin sketch?
Yeah, I still have
Fantastic.
It was. John was doing his own kind of startup-y thing, and I was working at Nokia, and we were experiencing the credit crisis in 2008, and it felt really frustrating. You graduate from university with all these kind of ideological hopes and aspirations of how you can change the world and do better, and it was really frustrating to watch world as we know it collapse to such an extent and leave people really angry and frustrated. And so we thought, how can we use what we do best, what as designers and artists, what are our skills, and felt like we could poke holes at the system by showing people alternatives, showing what else could be possible. And that's what Superflux started off as, the idea being that you're really questioning the idea of what's normal and starting to explore the edges of what's normal, and then move further out and start to explore what possibilities lie ahead that do not necessarily confirm us to this one way of knowing and being in this world.
And to achieve that, that range of perspectives, there's different lenses on the world. What skills do you look for in the people that you hire to achieve that sort of fusion of thinking and disciplines?
That's a really good question. I suppose first and foremost, we are looking for people who have a spirit of wanting to try things out. So I suppose, if you're saying I'm a graphic designer and I'm just going to do graphic design, which is design posters, that's great, but would you also consider exploring how certain materiality could be brought into graphic design, or how we might explore a future where language is not presented the way we understand today, or something, so we are always looking for people who are open to try things out. Once an intern we were interviewing said, I'm a Google designer, and we were like, what is that? It's like, I'll just Google whatever I don't know and learn it on the go. And we were like, yes, you're hired. So, we really like that openness and that attitude to learning on the go, because John and I are constantly learning on the go. We're making it up as we go along.
I think we're all making it up as we go along.
Yeah, I guess so.
To what extent do you think, how we are educated and trained leads to us ending up in these sort of disciplinary silos of how we think, and how does Superflux enable us to kind of break free of our silos?
First and foremost, Superflux has always been a project of active hope. So we are really interested in how do we navigate these very complex, interconnected challenges that we have today, but still show possibility? How do we navigate the predicament of climate change? How do we understand where AI will lead us? And in that process, we do end up creating cautionary tales, but also hopeful visions of what else could be. So in a sense, we are really interested in enabling the navigation of more hopeful visions. So then it doesn't really matter whether I'm coming from the lens of graphic design or product design or speculative design. What matters is how can we enable a transition from where we are today towards a collectively hopeful future.
Yeah. And just in terms of, could you maybe bring that very nice description, make it practical?
Yeah.
But maybe an example or two of how you brought this very different lens, indeed a hopeful, optimistic lens, into tackling some of those signature societal challenges that we at the RSA, as you know, hold dear, and you hold dear as well.
Sure. We work, we have a consulting model, so we work with businesses and they might come with us with specific challenges, like what is future of healthcare could be given how people live today. I think an example that might be useful is a self-initiated project that we started working on in collaboration with originally an insurance company who were looking to think about what will people want to insure in the future, and eventually it became our own research project exploring climate change. But really, climate change, as Timothy Morton says, is a hyper object. It's so vast and it's so amorphous, we really don't understand. You see a graph of temperature index going up and you're like, where am I in this? Most mornings, as you said, I can't even find my coffee grinder. How can people compute something so complex? And so we really wanted to make climate change really tangible, relatable, and we built this apartment, a London apartment set in around 2050 or so, when my son, John, and our son would be around our age. So we had this emotional lens. So the first thing is, how can we bring an emotional lens to the future? Data, predictions, probability models remain alienating. They do not put ourselves into those futures. So we try and do storytelling. Then we started building food computers from scratch. So that involved skills of product design, of prototyping, of modeling, of testing, experimenting. Once we had these food computers, there was a question of art direction of this apartment. It shouldn't look like a set, but it shouldn't look like a prediction either. It should look like something that people have literally stepped into, to not just confront their fears, but also to show them that, oh my God, it's possible. Our worst fears could be tackled with ingenuity, with craft, with design, with storytelling. And so people could literally step into this future, spend time in this apartment, and understand that this family who lived there had created mechanisms with their community to live in a very different way, in a very different context. And nowhere in that apartment did we say food insecurity, climate change. There was nothing. It was a one-on-one human confrontation with a completely different future that could be possible.
I find this absolutely fascinating on using that, this is my words, not yours, sort of full sensory immersion in an issue, rather than it being words on a page or a graph or some arid hypothesis. This is what it means for your lived experience. Full sensory. This is how it looks, this is how it feels, this is how it smells. As a way of making these issues real. That's in the spirit of what you described.
That's absolutely right. Like, imagine, you were sitting and you're going from one meeting to the next, and you have very little time, and you're being presented with reports and with PowerPoints and predictions, and then you go home and then you start again the next day. How much of that has sunk in? And you are under so much pressure to make decisions based on those data sets. And we confront so many such senior level business leaders, government leaders, institutional leaders, who we believe are at the foundational, kind of at the center of the decision making about our collective futures. And there is so much scientific evidence. There is a linguist at Berkeley University called George Lakoff, and he's written about how the human brain operates. Only 2% of our human brain uses data. 98% is through stories, experiences, and emotions, and metaphors. So really, what we are trying to do is not tell people what the future could be. We are inviting them to literally step into one possible future. Yeah. And this is not to say that this is a prediction, but to say what happens is once you experience something so sensory, it becomes part of what is known as your episodic memory. Yeah. So then next time you're thinking about a decision you want to make in the future, that experience will come back to you. Yeah. And will stay with you and will live with you and will enable you in hopefully better decision making.
I love that as a way of bringing these issues to life for a much broader audience. So things like the use of virtual reality. Yeah. Does that go in the same spirit that we could actually immerse people?
Yeah.
In a future and have them live that future? Mm-hmm. Is that in the same spirit?
It is absolutely. But this is my hypothesis. We need to test it. We've done both, but I feel that when people are invited to put a headset on, what happens is they are already aware that whatever they're going to experience is not real. Yeah. Sometimes confronting people with a fictional newspaper from the future has a bigger impact. Because it's mundane and it's boring and suddenly you read a headline and you say, hang on, so Russia has given up Ukraine war? Like, well, hang on. And so just kind of having, so I think definitely worth exploring different media, but I do want to emphasize on the point before, data is only what has been, not what could be. Yeah. And we are making all our decisions on what has been. Mm-hmm. But what could be different from what has been. Yeah. So in a way you can think of the work we are doing as a sort of speculative evidence. So we get beyond the sort of empirism of this kind of certain way of thinking that is not really allowing us to touch our inner spirit with what's going to happen.
Just to that, picking up that point, Anab, and I totally get that in the words I think from your TED talk from 2017, this is about making the future less of a foreign land than it is currently. Yeah. So this feels like domestic territory and real for you. In your experience, though, I mean, there's two ways. Let's say you're me and you've been immersed into how the world could be in 2050. Does that give people agency to go out and do something about it, or does it sort of depress them or scare them into thinking, what's to become of us? Yeah. How do we stop people being fatalistic about the future, I suppose, and more optimistic about their role in changing it?
That's a really good question and something we are battling with all the time. So I wouldn't say I've got answers. I've spoken to leaders who've been through some really discomforting experiences over a couple of days. There was once someone I know, a CEO, who took all the leaders to India, to a certain location, and they had to really confront a very different reality. And they went back and made some really momentous decisions. because of what they experienced. So sometimes injecting shock and discomfort can be really powerful, but I also agree that it feels like we're all living inside a dystopian science fiction novel right now in so many ways. You know, if you just see what sort of discussions have emerged from COP, you know, we need to literally stop all use of fossil fuels now. Like, so there is a real urgency that we are missing out, and we are holding on to small problems, like, you know, challenges that matter, but I wish there is a way to shake people out of individualism and really focus on a collective sort of sense of solidarity. So I am hoping that when we tell counterfactual stories, when we show people alternatives that are not these seductive, glossy stories that we see out in the world, maybe they will get a sense of agency, you know, and that can be done by doing, by experimenting, by prototyping. But you have to understand, stories are the way we meet the world. We are biologically wired to share stories. We need to tell different stories. We need to be able to show people different stories and then allow them to percolate in other people's minds. And I believe that they will then have the agency to make change.
Yeah. And in terms of that agency, Anab, I mean, your experience, there's encouraging people to themselves become more active.
Yeah.
But I mean, for what you say, given that the problems we face are global and collective, those problems are best tackled collectively and globally rather than individually.
Yeah.
Is what you do about bringing people together to have a sense of this being a team sport in pursuing these issues as well?
Yeah, absolutely, totally depends. So for instance, a few months ago, we did a very immersive experience for New York Climate Week. So in that instance, we really wanted to target leaders and specifically business leaders. And the idea was, and it was a brief from a client, and the idea was the CEOs need to experience FOMO, a sense of missing out, that why are we not creating business models and product ideas that are more sustainable, that have negative carbon impact, that are, you know, are not just focused on endless growth and using, extracting from the earth. And it worked. You know, we showed global solutions across the board, from community projects to indigenous projects to local product developments to large-scale infrastructural projects that businesses are leading to change the world. Yeah. And so, you know, it totally depends on who the audience is. CEOs experienced FOMO, and that was, yes, let's do this, you know.
And in that case, which is a really great, really interesting example, a great example of business leaders.
Yeah.
What is it they were fearful of missing out?
Yeah.
I mean, my experience with business, you know, some people are true believers,
yeah,
and there's a risk of, you know, you're preaching to the already converted because they're already true believers.
Yeah.
Whereas the key constituency are those that sort of want to believe, but need to be shown how to believe.
Yes.
So for those that you generated this fear of missing out, what is it they were fearful of missing out on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I suppose it's fear of missing out on change, on acknowledging change and being part of the change. And the reason is that the examples we showed worked in a way that they came from people, they displayed agency, but they showed other ways of living, and they showed alternate business models, and they showed alternate ideas of growth. And currently, some of the business leaders are so attached to quarterly returns and shareholder profit, they're not able to decouple their visions for their business from this quarterly return problem. Yeah. And I think we are trying to get people to think in far more radical and visionary ways. Bolder decisions, visionary decisions. Think of the legacy you're going to leave as an ancestor for the next 100 years. Think of your children and grandchildren, what worlds you're going to leave behind for them. I think it makes a huge difference when you are able to step out of the quarterly return problem or shareholder problem and really create the vision, because we believe, and we showed examples, that those problems around growth and profit can be resolved. So I think it was that fear that, oh, consumers want sustainable solutions, and oh my God, we're not doing it. Yeah.
Nice. So, as you know, we are the Royal Society of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce. I want to ask you about the first bit of that, the arts part of it, and the role of art installations in particular in shaping manufactures and commerce. You already mentioned this in the context of your discussions with business leaders, but tell me a bit about what role art and art installations in particular might play in changing minds, reshaping business, reshaping civil society.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I think it is the arts that has such a crucial role to play and is often looked upon as something whimsical or of not significant importance to business decisions. But I think we need to suspend suspicion. I think we need to have a much more open-ended compartment for how we see the world. What art does is allows you to be eccentric, to be risky, to be courageous, to be bold. And that's what our artistic installations want to do. They do not want to show a one-sided view of the world. So you walk into this apartment, which was an art installation, you're not going to say, oh, this beautiful world, everything is solved. No, there was friction. There were recipes for Fox Creole. So they're going to have to, living in an urban context. There was a book that said pets as protein, cookbook. So I'm not saying that there was a sense of friction and discomfort and messiness, but that's the risk that art can take, and that's the eccentricity and experimental approaches that art can bring that actually businesses have so much to learn from. It's unfortunate that we tend to compartmentalize these things, but actually some of the most powerful works, businesses, are the ones that have been inspired from art and continue to be.
Can you give us an example, Anab, of a business embracing this and doing something with art or with art installations to lift them up, to lift their eyes to the horizon and think about them or their staff to think about issues in a different way?
I mean, of course, one of our clients is Ikea, and we've been doing we've done 2 installations with them, large scale, one at COP in Glasgow and at New York Climate Week. They clearly understand the importance of doing this. They are leading, even though they are one of the biggest sort of businesses who have had a huge impact negatively on the planet. They are also committed to being a people and planet positive business. So they recognize the importance of bringing this thinking deep into the business. So we've done internal work around world building and storytelling. We've created toolkits and masterclass for the entire 150,000 employees to be able to use and start to imagine alternate possibilities. So I'm not saying everyone's there yet, but we are interested in supporting those businesses who we feel want to shift the needle. On the other hand, these kind of extreme, more experimental art installations show what's possible. So that becomes a sort of a North Star. So we want to work from ground up, but also from bottom up, like top down, to show more North Star-like visions, and then enable those who want to change to be there. So for me, these boundaries between art and design and science and business and economics and systems change, they all blur really quite easily.
I want to ask you a personal question.
Yeah.
Which is, you've made very clear and set out very, very elegantly the importance not just of thinking the future through, but doing so through an optimistic lens. Mm-hmm. So my question is, how do you personally maintain your optimism, given the multiple challenges that we know the world face, that nation states face, that organizations face, whether commercial or non-commercial. What is it that sustains you in terms of that sort of spirit of optimism? And what tips would you give me in maintaining that spirit of optimism, Anna?
It's difficult, I have to admit. I work a lot with futures or alternatives, and when you start to be able to see not just the first level consequences, but the second and third level consequences, it's not great. It can be very demoralizing and anxiety inducing. But I also have seen, like I come from India, and I saw that India, the first sort of revolt against the British colonial rule started in 1857. And eventually, it was 90 years later, in 1947, where British left India and India became independent. And so revolutions are slow. And revolutions are slow and dark and murky, but they're also full of hope. So we have to stick to it, because I know that we can affect change, but we need to be able to do within our skill sets and within our abilities what we are able to do as responsibly as possible. And that's why I'm really happy to work with government, with businesses, with cultural institutions, with research labs. Whoever wants to be making this change, I'll enable that change in whatever way I can. And that's what gives me hope. Young people give me hope. I teach, and I feel the kids are all right. But I also know that it's our responsibility. The kids are grappling with what they feel is a future stolen from them. And I think it's our responsibility to be good ancestors and leave them a future that they can really not just survive, but thrive in.
Yeah. So I want to take you on to maybe a final set of questions, which is about that future, that optimistic future.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned this is the journal issue celebrating our 270th anniversary.
Yeah.
I won't ask you, even as a futurist, to peer 270 years into the future. I might be stretching it a bit.
Yeah.
Anab.
Yeah.
But I would like to ask you about, the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and paint me a picture, actually, of how it could be. Paint me a picture that, in your classes with your young people, you could tell a story about how much better it could be if we all act in a somewhat different way.
Yeah. Well, you could imagine it's 2071, and a lot happened. 2023 to 2035 were horrific, because we had to take so many bold decisions. When you talk about net zero, they talked about net zero in 2050 a lot. And it was so tiring, because that's just a number. And what does that mean? Well, that means that we are all experiencing hefty carbon taxes. We're experiencing a complete phase out of fossil fuels. Travel is restricted, but there was so much ingenious innovation. What you realize is that when we did surveys, we found out that if people were happier with 60% less electricity and power than they were actually using. So actually happier. They didn't need to have the lights on all the time. What happened was, when you started to have limited energy from the renewable sources that were available to us, we spent a lot of time resting. Resting doesn't mean being lazy and just sleeping, but means nurturing our land, nurturing our food, nurturing our young people, learning education differently, learning to share and cooperate instead of following a very competitive trajectory, learning to be having a reciprocal relationship with the earth, not an extractive one. So actually, when you start to see that a different way of life that is not full of the comforts the Western world especially has got so used to, you are actually a lot happier and thriving. But there were a lot of sacrifices that needed to happen. But I think we've managed it pretty well.
That is an optimistic note. And you mentioned there happiness, which made me think, is that the way we should be keeping score societally?
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, is that what it's all about? And is that where we should be directing our attention rather than the other metrics?
GDP. Yeah, absolutely. I went to Bhutan this summer, and Bhutan is it's beautiful. It's the first country that came up with the idea of National Happiness Index, and they are happy, and they have less, and they are really battling this desire of young people to want everything that they see on television, versus acknowledging that we've given up 70% of our country to our forests and our nature reserves and everything. Every person there gets a little piece of land and a house. They're supported by the government, but there are certain restrictions. You cannot go and do whatever you want with the land. You cannot just buy any land you feel like. You cannot just, even the king's land is very, very limited. They don't own a lot of land. Beautiful, challenging, but very, very beautiful plan of how, and a vision, deeply visionary thinking, incredibly visionary. And so, they're happy. Not everybody's 100% happy, but I just didn't want to come back. It was beautiful, and that sort of reckoning, combining the personal, the ecological, the spiritual, the cultural, the social, it was all interwoven in the same fabric. And I think that's the aspiration.
That's a very nice picture, beautiful picture you painted there. I'll have to visit Bhutan, is what I'm thinking from that.
Definitely.
Final question from me, if I may, which I want to make it, I want to localize it a bit actually.
Yeah.
To not just the UK or London, but actually to the RSA. On our big anniversary year. Give us your insights, your imaginings of how it could be for us at the RSA, and how we could help contribute to this more optimistic future that you've painted out for us so beautifully. What contribution we can make in bringing that about as a reality. Yeah,
I would say there are two pathways. One is the practical. I'm sure you are lobbying the government to bring back creative sector and art and the support for the creativity and arts. There was an article only yesterday, I think the House of Lords submitted a report which showed importance of creativity and artistic thinking, and how our education, secondary education, had become so narrow. So really, if RSA is best positioned to support and lobby for more sort of interconnected, critical, creative, multidisciplinary education right from childhood. There's so much evidence that shows children lose all the creativity by the time they become adults. So, on the other hand, I think I've been inspired by work we've done recently, which is out in the Strand, Aldwych, it's called The Quiet Enchanting. So, there's so much talk about rewilding the world around us, rewilding our landscapes. I think RSA could pursue the rewilding of the spirit. I think that the rewilding of the minds and the souls and the hearts. And I think you're already trying to do that through your regenerative design programs. I just think there needs to be more emphasis on emergent thinking, on less prescriptive, but more open storytelling, creative approaches that sort of nurture the rewilding of the spirit.
I love that. I will write that down. The rewilding of the mind, the spirit, and the heart, I think. I was listening very carefully. I haven't written it down yet, but I will after this. That's a wonderful way of setting out our challenge, and fits very well, I think, with some of the work that we are doing.
That's great. I have no idea, so this is completely a shot in the
dark. No, it's the words you've used to capture it are much better than mine. So I shall be borrowing them.
Absolutely.
And it's been wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you.
And all the fantastic work that you and Superflux have been doing over so many years. Thank you for bringing that spirit of optimism
Thank you.
Into our discussion that's so important for us at the RSA, for you at Superflux, and indeed for the world more generally. And really look forward to working together with you in partnership to bring about that more optimistic reality.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for all the questions.